Long ago, in the sun-drenched hills of Canaan, where olive trees swayed in the wind and the dust of the earth clung to every step, there lived a young boy named Joseph. He was 17 years old, the age where the world feels wide and new, full of hope and questions, dreams, and the ache of growing. Joseph wasn't the oldest. In fact, he was nearly the youngest of 12 sons, all born to his father Jacob. His 10 older brothers had strong arms and calloused hands. They were the ones who wrangled sheep, lifted heavy stones, and spoke in the gruff, clipped voices of men who were used to the harshness of life. Joseph, though, he was different. He spent more time thinking than fighting. He noticed the shapes of the clouds, the way the stars blinked at night like they were whispering secrets. He was the kind of boy who would pause on a walk just to pick a wildflower or follow a butterfly. His brothers rolled their eyes at that. To them, Joseph was soft, fragile, and worse, he was their father's favorite. Jacob didn't hide it. He was an old man by the time Joseph was born, already weary from years of running, wrestling with God and men, losing the love of his life, Rachel, in childbirth. Joseph was the last piece of her, and Jacob clung to him like a lifeline. The way he looked at Joseph was different. His eyes softened, his voice lowered, and the brothers saw it all. One morning, Jacob called Joseph into his tent and held out a folded bundle wrapped in linen. "Come," Jacob said, his voice low. "I've made something for you." Joseph stepped forward and took the bundle into his arms. As he unwrapped it, a gasp escaped his lips. The robe shimmered in the morning light. It was long and flowing, woven from threads of deep red, soft gold, forest green, and royal blue. Each color was richer than anything Joseph had ever worn. This was not a robe for a shepherd or a servant. This was a robe fit for a prince. "For me?" he whispered. Jacob nodded, his weathered hand resting on Joseph's shoulder. "Yes, my son. You are dearly loved. Wear it proudly." Joseph put it on, and it felt like love itself was wrapped around him. But to his brothers, that robe was not a gift. It was a declaration. Every thread shouted, "This one matters more than you." And the anger that had long simmered in their hearts began to boil. Wherever Joseph went, the robe went with him. It billowed behind him in the wind. It caught the sunlight in ways that made people look twice. And though Joseph didn't walk proudly, though he didn't gloat or boast, the sight of him was enough to make his brothers' jaws clench. And then, one night, the dream came. Joseph sat up in his bed long after the others had fallen asleep. His heart was pounding. His forehead was damp. The dream had felt so real, so strange, and yet so clear. The next morning, as his brothers gathered around the fire for breakfast, he couldn't keep it in. "I had the strangest dream last night," he said, smiling as he sat beside them. The brothers looked up, some chewing, some ignoring him. "We were out in the fields, tying bundles of grain," Joseph said. "And suddenly, my bundle stood up, tall, strong, and all of your bundles gathered around mine and bowed down to it." The chewing stopped. "You, what?" said Simeon, his brow furrowing. "They bowed down," said Levi, his voice sharp. "It was just a dream," Joseph said quickly. "I didn't mean—" "You think you'll rule over us," said Judah. "You think we'll serve you?" The laughter that followed was cold and bitter. Joseph's cheeks turned red. He didn't understand. He hadn't meant to offend. The dream had felt important, like a message from something greater than himself. He should have kept quiet. But the dreams didn't stop. A few nights later, another dream came. Bigger, stranger. more beautiful and more terrifying all at once. This time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. He told his father. Jacob listened, his eyes narrowing. "Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed bow to you?" he asked, sounding stern. But inside something shifted. Jacob had once had dreams too, dreams of ladders reaching to heaven, of angels and promises. He didn't understand Joseph's dreams, but he didn't forget them either. Joseph's brothers, on the other hand, were done listening. The dreams had become too much. The robe, the favoritism. Now, the dreams. They began to talk when Joseph wasn't around. They watched him with narrowed eyes. Every time he walked by, something dark twisted in their hearts. And then came the day. Jacob called Joseph early one morning. The sun was barely above the hills. "Your brothers are pasturing the flocks near Shechem," he said. "Go and see how they're doing. Bring word back to me." Joseph nodded. "Yes, father." He didn't hesitate. He didn't suspect a thing. He put on his robe, the one his father gave him, and set off across the hills, his sandals crunching against the dry earth, the wind tugging gently at the colorful fabric as he walked. It took hours to find them. When the brothers saw him coming, before they could see his face, before they could hear his voice, they saw the coat, that awful, radiant coat, glowing like fire in the sun. "There he is," said one. "The dreamer," another spat. They stood in silence for a long time. Then one of them spoke the words that none of them had dared say aloud until now. "Let's kill him." "We'll say a wild animal got him," someone added. "Tear his robe, smear it with blood. Father will believe it." The others nodded grimly, but Reuben, the oldest, wavered. His heart wasn't as hard as the rest. "No," he said. "Let's not kill him. Throw him into that pit. Leave him there." He planned to sneak back later, to rescue him and bring him home. Joseph reached them, smiling as always. "Brothers," he called out, waving. He didn't notice the way they surrounded him, not until it was too late. Hands grabbed his arms, fingers pulled at the robe. "Wait, what are you? Stop." They wrestled him to the ground. Someone struck him. The world spun. He cried out, "Why? What did I do?" No one answered. They tore the coat from his shoulders. One of them held it up like a trophy. Then they dragged Joseph to the edge of a deep, dry cistern. He begged them, "Please, don't do this." And then, darkness. The walls of the pit were steep. The ground was hard. Dust stung his eyes. Joseph lay there in shock, blinking up at the circle of sky above. His brothers were silhouettes. They didn't look down at him. They walked away and sat down nearby and ate lunch. They laughed and passed bread. Joseph could hear them. The same mouths that had once called him brother now chewed without care, as if nothing had happened. And then, camel bells. A caravan appeared, slow and steady on the horizon. Traders from Midian, their camels heavy with spices, balm, and myrrh, heading south toward Egypt. Judah stood up. "Why kill him?" he said. "Let's sell him. He's our brother after all." The others agreed. They pulled Joseph out of the pit. He was shaking. His voice was gone. He didn't fight. He just looked at each of them, eyes wide with disbelief. They handed him to the traders. The ropes went around his wrists. He was sold for 20 pieces of silver, and then he was gone. They watched him disappear behind the dust of the caravan trail, the desert wind pulling at his hair, his silhouette shrinking with every step. Joseph looked back once. No one waved. That evening they dipped his robe in goat's blood. They didn't speak much on the walk home. When they reached Jacob, they held out the coat. "Is this your son's robe?" they asked. Jacob took it in trembling hands. His eyes scanned the fabric. His voice broke. "It is," he whispered, "my son's robe. A wild animal must have devoured him." He collapsed to his knees, tore his own clothes in grief. The sound that escaped him was raw and low, something not quite human. My son, Joseph." He refused to eat. He refused to be comforted. "I will mourn him until I join him in the grave," he said. And far away, as the stars blinked above a strange desert, Joseph walked toward Egypt, his wrists bound, his heart broken. He had lost everything: his family, his freedom, his home, but not his destiny, and not his God. For though the dreamer had been thrown into a pit, and though the road to Egypt was long and cruel, the story was not over. No, this was only the beginning. The camels moved slowly under the weight of their loads, their long legs swaying like boats on the sea of sand. The sun beat down from above, and Joseph walked with his head low, dust curling up around his feet with every step. His wrists were tied with rough rope, the fibers biting into his skin. He didn't cry. He had cried already until no tears would come. Now, he just walked. He didn't know where they were taking him. Egypt, they said. But what was Egypt? He had heard of it, of course. A land of pyramids and gold, gods with animal heads, and mighty pharaohs who ruled like gods themselves. But that place was far from the green hills of Canaan, far from his father's tents, far from everything he had ever known. He had stopped hoping his brothers would come for him. He had stopped hoping anyone would. Still, in the quiet corners of his heart, he whispered prayers. Not loud ones, not the kind that echo across mountain tops. Just small, trembling thoughts. God, are you still with me? Days passed. The caravan crossed rivers, moved through oases and desert stretches, until at last they arrived at the edge of Egypt. The land was different here, greener near the Nile, but crowded and strange. People spoke in languages Joseph didn't understand. They wore white linen robes and painted their eyes with black lines. They bowed to statues and walked with servants fanning them. It all felt like a dream, but not the kind Joseph used to have. He was led to a market, a place where people were bought and sold. He stood in line with other slaves, men and women and children, all waiting with hollow eyes and heavy shoulders. A man came, tall and clean-shaven, his eyes sharp with authority. He wore gold rings on his fingers and a fine robe over his shoulders. "Potiphar," someone whispered, "captain of Pharaoh's guard." He walked slowly past each slave, examining them like livestock. When he came to Joseph, he stopped, looked him up and down. Joseph stood as tall as he could, shoulders back, eyes forward. Something about him, something quiet but strong, caught Potiphar's attention. "I'll take this one," he said. And just like that, Joseph was sold again. But something changed that day. Even as Joseph stepped into Potiphar's grand house, with its towering stone walls and strange carvings, something moved quietly in the background. It wasn't seen, it wasn't shouted, but it was there. The Lord was with Joseph, and everything Joseph touched flourished. He began with the smallest tasks, sweeping the floors, trimming the gardens, bringing water to the cooks. But everything he did well. He worked without complaining, he listened, he learned. And Potiphar noticed. Soon, Joseph was trusted with more. Within months, he was overseeing the household staff, then the storage rooms, then the fields, and finally Potiphar made a bold decision. He placed everything he owned under Joseph's care. He said, "With Joseph here, I don't worry about a thing, except what I'm going to eat." And Joseph, he remained humble. He walked through the palace with quiet steps, his words few but wise. He remembered the God of his fathers. He still whispered prayers, and though he was still a slave in a foreign land, he felt something returning: dignity, purpose, maybe even hope. But peace is rarely left alone for long. Potiphar's wife had noticed Joseph too. He was strong, handsome, kind, unlike the hollow men she was used to, and she began to watch him, at first from a distance, then with words. "Come lie with me," she whispered one day when no one was around. Joseph's stomach twisted. He stepped back. "No," he said firmly. "Your husband trusts me with everything. How could I betray him? And more than that, how could I sin against God?" But she didn't stop. Day after day, she found him, cornered him, spoke to him in soft, dangerous tones. Joseph avoided her as best he could, until one day he walked into the house and found it silent. No servants, no noise, just her. She was waiting. She grabbed his arm, pulling him close. "No one's here, just us." Joseph's heart pounded. Fear surged through him like lightning. He pulled away, but she clung to his robe. So he ran. He didn't look back. He left his robe in her hands and ran out of the house like a man escaping fire. She stood there, trembling with rage. She had been humiliated, rejected, and she would not be made a fool. She screamed loudly, called the servants, held up the robe. "This Hebrew slave tried to attack me," she cried. "He came in and tried to force himself on me." The house filled with shouts, and when Potiphar returned, his face darkened. He didn't ask questions. He didn't wait for the truth. He had Joseph thrown into prison, cold, dark, forgotten. But even there, God was with him. The prison warden began to notice something strange. Joseph didn't complain. He worked, he listened, he helped. And just like before, Joseph was given more responsibility. Eventually, the warden put him in charge of the other prisoners. Still, Joseph didn't know what his life meant anymore. He had dreamed once of stars and sheaves and people bowing, and yet here he was, a slave, then a prisoner, forgotten by family, lied about, left behind. But still, he prayed, he waited. Then, one night, 2 new prisoners arrived, officials from Pharaoh's court, a baker and a cupbearer, each with their own burdens. Joseph spoke gently to them, asked about their dreams, listened, and when they told him the strange things they had seen while sleeping, Joseph listened with a stillness that had nothing to do with the walls around them. He said, "Interpretations belong to God. Tell me what you saw." The cupbearer dreamed of a vine with 3 branches. Grapes grew quickly, and he squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup. Joseph nodded. "In 3 days you'll be restored to your position. Pharaoh will lift up your head." The baker's dream was darker, 3 baskets of bread on his head, and birds eating from the top basket. Joseph's voice softened. "In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head also, but not to restore you. You will die." And 3 days later, everything happened exactly as Joseph had said. The cupbearer was restored. The baker was executed. Before the cupbearer left the prison, Joseph pulled him aside. Please, remember me. Mention me to Pharaoh. I was taken from my home, sold into slavery. I've done nothing to deserve this." The cupbearer nodded, eyes full of gratitude. But once he returned to the palace, he forgot, and Joseph remained in prison. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. The seasons changed. The Nile rose and fell. The sun came and went. But Joseph stayed, waiting, wondering. The years passed like slow-moving clouds over the Egyptian sky. Joseph remained in prison for 2 long years after the cupbearer was set free. 2 years of stone walls, of waiting, of silence. But he no longer fought the silence. He had made peace with it. His days were full of quiet service, his heart full of quiet prayers. And then everything changed in a single night. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, ruler of the most powerful empire in the world, had a dream. Not once, but twice. The dreams were vivid, unsettling, unlike anything he had known. In the first, he stood by the Nile, and out of the water came 7 fat, healthy cows. But then came 7 more cows, thin, sickly, starving, and they devoured the fat ones. In the second dream, there were 7 ears of grain, full and ripe, then 7 more, shriveled and scorched, and they swallowed up the healthy ones. Pharaoh woke sweating. He called all his magicians, his wise men, his priests. But no one could explain the dreams. No one could even guess. And that was when the cupbearer, who had long forgotten the young Hebrew in prison, suddenly remembered. "I know someone," he said quickly. "When I was in prison, a Hebrew youth interpreted my dream, and everything happened exactly as he said." Pharaoh wasted no time. Joseph was pulled from his cell, washed, shaved, dressed in clean linen. He stood before Pharaoh's golden throne, his heart steady. Pharaoh looked him over. "I have heard that you can interpret dreams." Joseph shook his head. "Not I," he said quietly, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he seeks." So Pharaoh told his dreams, every detail, and when he finished, the room fell silent. Then Joseph spoke. He explained that both dreams meant the same thing. 7 years of great abundance were coming to Egypt, harvests like never before. But after that, 7 years of famine, a famine so severe it would wipe out the memory of the good years. Pharaoh leaned forward. Joseph continued, "You should appoint a wise man to oversee the land. During the 7 good years, store up grain in cities across Egypt. That way, when the famine comes, the people will not starve." Pharaoh stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked around the room, at his officials, his magicians, his guards. "Can we find anyone like this man?" he asked. "One in whom is the Spirit of God." And just like that, Joseph, once a slave, once a prisoner, was given Pharaoh's signet ring. He was robed in fine linen again, but this time it was royal. A gold chain was placed around his neck, and a chariot was prepared for him to ride. Wherever he went, people bowed. He was second only to Pharaoh in all of Egypt, and he was only 30 years old. During the next 7 years, Joseph worked tirelessly. He traveled across the nation, overseeing the collection of grain. Barns were filled, cities were prepared. And when the years of famine finally came, and the rivers ran low, and the earth cracked in the sun, the people cried out for food, and Joseph opened the storehouses. But the famine didn't just strike Egypt. Far away in the land of Canaan, Jacob's family felt it too. The pastures dried, the wells ran low, the animals grew thin. Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, so he sent 10 of his sons, the same 10 who had once thrown Joseph into a pit. He kept Benjamin, the youngest, at home. He couldn't bear to lose another son. The brothers arrived in Egypt and were brought before the governor, this powerful, distant man dressed in robes and gold, speaking through an interpreter. They bowed low to the ground before him, faces to the floor. Joseph's heart stopped. There they were, his brothers, the same faces, older now, weathered, but unmistakable, and there they were, bowing before him, just like in his dream. They didn't recognize him. How could they? The last time they saw him, he was a boy in a colorful robe, pleading from the bottom of a pit. Now he stood before them as an Egyptian ruler, his voice formal, his face unreadable. He stared at them, and memories rushed in like a flood. He remembered their hands tearing his robe, their laughter, the terror of being dragged away, the cold, dark nights in the pit, the loneliness, the pain. He could have revealed himself in that moment, but he didn't. Instead, he tested them. "You are spies," he accused through the interpreter. "You've come to see where our land is weak." "No, my lord," they cried. "We are honest men. Your servants, all sons of one man. We were 12 brothers. One is no more, and the youngest is at home with our father." Joseph's breath caught. They still remembered him, even if they thought he was gone. He had them imprisoned for 3 days. Then he released them, but kept Simeon behind. "If you are telling the truth," he said, "go home, bring your youngest brother. Then I will know." They left with bags of grain and a storm of guilt. "God is punishing us for what we did to our brother," they whispered among themselves. They didn't know Joseph could understand every word. He turned away and wept. When they returned to Canaan and told Jacob, he cried out in despair. "Joseph is gone. Now Simeon. And you want to take Benjamin?" "No." But the famine continued. Hunger does not listen to sorrow. Finally, Jacob relented. "Take him," he said, "and may God Almighty grant you mercy." When Joseph saw them return, when he saw Benjamin, the brother who shared his mother, the brother he had not seen in years, he nearly collapsed. He excused himself, hurried into another room, and wept so loudly the servants could hear. He washed his face and came back, composed. He prepared a feast for them. He sat them in order of their birth, and they looked at each other in amazement. Then he did something curious. He gave Benjamin 5 times as much food as the others. He was watching, listening, waiting. Later he sent them away with full sacks of grain, but secretly he had his silver cup placed inside Benjamin's bag. When they were barely out of the city, his men overtook them. "Why have you stolen from my master?" they shouted. The brothers were horrified. "We didn't. Search us. If anyone has it, let him die." They didn't know what had been planted. The bags were opened. The cup was found in Benjamin's sack. They tore their clothes in grief. Not Benjamin, anything but Benjamin. They returned to Joseph, fell before him. "Take us instead," Judah pleaded. "Our father will die if we don't bring him back. We've already lost one son." Joseph couldn't take it anymore. He sent everyone else out of the room, the guards, the servants, the interpreter. Then he stood, trembling, and in his own tongue he said, "I am Joseph." They stared at him, frozen, pale, disbelieving. "Is my father still alive?" he asked. They couldn't answer. They were terrified. But Joseph, He wasn't angry. He stepped forward. His voice broke. "Don't be afraid. Don't blame yourselves. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. He sent me ahead of you to save lives." And then he embraced them, one by one. Tears poured like rain after a long drought. The brothers who had once betrayed him now wept on his shoulder. And Joseph held them all. Finally, after all those years, after the pit, the prison, the pain, Joseph was home. Not the land, but the hearts. Joseph held his brothers in his arms, weeping so hard his body trembled. The ones who had sold him, the ones who had stripped him of his robe, his home, his childhood. He held them now, not with bitterness, not with blame, but with the kind of forgiveness that doesn't come from the world. It came from somewhere deeper, somewhere sacred. For a long time they didn't move. They knelt there in silence, ashamed, stunned, not knowing what to do with this mercy that was too large for words. Joseph leaned back at last and looked into their eyes, each one of them. "Go home," he said gently, "and bring my father to me. Tell him I'm alive. Tell him everything." They nodded, eyes still wide. It was as if they were children again. Joseph sent them with wagons, horses, carts filled with grain and goods. He gave them new clothes and food for the journey, but for Benjamin he packed 5 times as much. He couldn't help it. This was his full brother, his mother's son. It had been so long. As they left, he gave one last instruction, with the smallest smile. "Don't quarrel on the way." He knew them. He knew how guilt could turn to bickering, how shame could twist into arguments. He didn't want them to carry that anymore. Meanwhile, back in Canaan, Jacob sat in his tent, the wind whispering through the flaps, his heart quieter than it had been in years. Since Joseph died, or so he believed, a part of him had been buried too. Nothing could truly comfort him. Not food, not grandchildren, not time. Then he saw the wagons coming, dozens of them, rumbling across the land, his sons alive and shouting, and at the center of it all the words that struck him like lightning. "Joseph is alive." Jacob staggered. He blinked. He didn't believe them. "Joseph is alive," they said again. "Not only alive, he's the ruler of all Egypt." The words fell like a flood over dry ground. Jacob closed his eyes. Then, slowly, he stood. "It is enough," he whispered. "My son Joseph is alive. I will go to him before I die." The journey was long, but the strength came back to Jacob like the return of spring. He leaned on his staff, rode in the wagons Joseph had sent, and when he crossed into Egypt and saw his son again, his Joseph standing tall, arms open, eyes glistening, it was as though all those missing years were swallowed up in that one embrace. Joseph wept on his father's neck for a long, long time. "I am ready to die," Jacob said, holding him, "for I have seen your face, and you are alive." Joseph brought his family to Pharaoh, who welcomed them and offered them the best of the land, Goshen, a green stretch of pasture away from the crowds of the cities, where they could raise their flocks and live in peace. 70 in all came from Jacob's family, sons and daughters, grandsons, little children clinging to mother's skirts. They had lived in famine, in fear. Now they lived under Joseph's protection, and Egypt, because of Joseph, did not starve. As the famine deepened across the world, the people came to him, desperate. He opened the storehouses. He traded grain for livestock, for land. Pharaoh grew rich, but the people lived. And so, Joseph's story came to an end, but not in bitterness, not in revenge, not in sorrow. It ended in grace. It ended in forgiveness. It ended with the quiet triumph of a man who chose mercy when he could have chosen vengeance, who chose love when he had every right to hate. A man who learned that even when everything is taken from you, your freedom, your family, your future, God is still writing, even in silence, even in the pit. Joseph had once dreamed of sheaves and stars bowing low, not knowing how much pain would come before the dream would bloom. But in the end, he realized the dream was never about power. It was about purpose. What his brothers meant for evil, what the world meant to crush him, God meant for good, to save lives, to preserve a people, to build a nation. And so the boy in the colorful coat became the man who wore a crown, not just on his head, but in his heart. A crown of humility, a crown of wisdom, a crown of faith that never broke, even in the darkest places. His story echoes across time because it reminds us no betrayal is greater than God's redemption. No pit is too deep for his reach. No silence is beyond his voice, and no broken story is too broken for him to finish beautifully. That is the story. That is the promise, and it is still true today. So when life feels unfair, when the dreams you once held slip through your fingers, when you're waiting in a place that feels forgotten, remember Joseph. And trust the one who never forgets, the one who always finishes what he starts, the one who brings beauty out of ashes and life out of the pit every single time. Amen. Thank you for listening to this tender story. If it touched your heart, please help our little channel grow by liking the video, sharing it with someone you love, and subscribing so we can bring you more soft and peaceful stories about God's love. You are so loved, always.